Welcome back, younglings. Star Wars is the gift that keeps on giving. So for today's video, let's forge our own holocron. And let's take a look at some reasons why I think Padme could have actually been the chosen one. And although it's a brief theory and admittedly a bit of a reach, I noticed something interesting about Padme and Anakin's dialogue when they met during The Phantom Menace. It's a meme-worthy line that we've all had a good laugh about. Do you remember that scene in Watto's shop when Anakin and Padme have their first bit of conversation?
Don't touch anything.
Are you an angel?
What?
An angel. I heard the deep space pilots talk about them. They're the most beautiful creatures in the universe. They live on the moons of Viego, I think.
You're a funny little boy. How do you know so much?
Are you an angel? And here's another line, a little hint from Yoda. A scene that I think could be very important as it pertains to Padme and little Anakin.
Gravity is pulling all the stars in the area towards this spot.
Gravity's silhouette remains, but the star and all the planets disappeared, they have. How can this be?
Master? Because someone erased it from the archive memory.
Truly wonderful the mind of a child is.
So hear me out and let's dig a little bit into this theory in holocron. During the course of the Clone Wars and even before in The Phantom Menace, it always seemed like Padme was the driving force behind goodness, reason, logic, and a return to normalcy for the millions in the galaxy. So specifically in The Phantom Menace, Padme fights for what is right, before resorting to military action with regards to her home planet of Naboo and the siege and blockade that happened on it. She tries diplomacy until the very last moment. Now when she escapes Naboo to the big city of Coruscant, instead of getting wrapped up in Palpatine's interest in self-promotion to chancellorship, Padme rejects the idea of riding his coattail, and instead returns home to Naboo to fight the good fight. Now of course, merely doing the right thing doesn't make someone a chosen one, and it doesn't really even suggest that maybe she has those traits, but that fateful line we referenced before is very important. Despite the theory crafting, I still believe Anakin is the consensus chosen one. But I thought it was very interesting that Anakin saw Padme as angelic, and that she kind of has those angelic qualities. Now let's focus in a little bit on the qualities of Anakin at the time she has this conversation with Padme. Being his age, it didn't seem like a flirtatious attempt at wooing a young Padme. It genuinely seemed like a sincere question for the Queen of Naboo. Are you an angel? And I think this ties back to Yoda's thoughts on the mind of a child. Remember that line we mentioned before? Truly wonderful the mind of a child is. A mind that is full of wonderment. And I also think this could tie back to instances where the Force is used by children. In certain situations, we've seen Force-sensitive children display great power when they cannot control their emotions. Take Cal Kestis or Grogu, for example. So did Anakin have a premonition that Padme was actually the chosen one? Was that line something that we just missed? To me, I've always thought that just as a child's Force abilities can be violent and powerful, so can their senses or foresight. Perhaps their Force foresight is so powerful that it can see through darkness. Maybe it could even see into someone's soul and recognize something special. You see, where I think the Jedi partially went wrong can be traced back to scenes in The Phantom Menace. During The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon Jinn conducts a blood test on a young Annie. Both he and Obi-Wan remark on the greatness of Anakin's midichlorian count. Mace Windu at the temple says Anakin's too old. Behind the Jedi at this time was numeric criteria, ways to grade potential Jedi, how to assign a certain category to a certain person. Was someone so important they had to gamble their safety to recruit them away from the Sith? Was someone's count not high enough, leaving them to rot in slavery under the Hutts? Was someone just too old, making the Jedi quantify age and power into fear? As Palpatine said, it's all dogmatic. And while Palpatine is evil, his comment about the Jedi's being dogmatic, certainly ring true here, and perhaps the Jedi missed something bigger than Anakin Skywalker. So how does this all relate back to that fateful line between Anakin and Padme? Well, perhaps the Jedi were so focused on Anakin's abilities and his midichlorian count that they missed what was standing out right in front of them, something strong, a Force user that a powerful, raw, full potential Anakin saw immediately as a child, something the dogmatic Jedi did not. So let's go a little further into the core of our holocron. There are a few more examples worth discussing that might actually suggest that Anakin is not the chosen one and it was actually Padme. In the Attack of the Clones, Padme survives a mass explosion on a landing platform in Coruscant. Later in the same instance, she evades the poisonous worms sent to kill her. She also narrowly escapes death in the Geonosian factory, and later in the Geonosian battle arena, she fights off droids and monsters. Now, while it's true she had help along the way, it's still worth noting her remarkable ability to survive these situations. You might say plot armor, some might say coincidence. I think there just might be something a little bit different here worth digging into. Now, let's consider Palpatine's thoughts on Padme. There are many instances and examples where Padme is actually Palpatine's biggest enemy and rival, and not just politically, as she opted for pacifism over the creation of these large armies, but also in a personal sense. She had something Palpatine wanted desperately: Anakin. Padme has such a hold over Anakin that it took a civil war and decades of planning on Palpatine's part to finally split them apart, a dyad in a sense. Ironically, in the end, just as Obi-Wan stayed with Luke Skywalker, Padme stayed with Anakin. In fact, in the latest Vader comic series, we see Vader visit Padme's grave once again. Padme was always with Anakin, and Padme was always with Vader. Was Palpatine always with Vader? Not really. In this theory holocron we're unraveling, Padme, in the Netherworld, became the spark of hope. She became the goodness that Luke sensed in Vader, giving Vader the courage to kill Palpatine. That is another reason I think Padme was truly the chosen one. The light and rage of Padme living in Anakin was so powerful, it turned him away from the darkness that was shrouded on him by Palpatine, provided a beacon of hope within him that his son would later sense. And before we get to the final points of this holocron theory, let me know if you'd like a part 2 on why I think Padme could have been the chosen one. So let's take a quick little U-turn and bounce around to the original trilogy. George Lucas has mentioned that Leia would have been the chosen one in his roadmap for the sequels. This raises an interesting question. Is the concept of the chosen one fluid? Does it ebb and flow to another person deemed worthy? Possibly, and that's something I'd love to explore in another theory video, but it also pertains to this theory on Padme. According to Paul Duncan's Star Wars Jedi Archives, George Lucas is quoted as saying, quote, "By the end of the trilogy, Luke would have rebuilt much of the Jedi Order, and we would have had the renewal of New Republic, with Leia, Senator Organa, becoming the Supreme Chancellor in charge of everything. So she ended up being the chosen one." So could it be that George Lucas subtly embedded this idea in the prequels? Did he hint to us that Padme was the real chosen one all along? And was that meme line a little more important than we all thought? Little Anakin senses it, and through Padme, their children bring balance to the Force, right? Because Luke ultimately prompts Vader to turn on Palpatine, and George Lucas says that Leia could have eventually been the chosen one. And this all comes through Padme. Even after her death, she remains in Vader's mind, providing the spark that eventually leads to the downfall of evil when it mattered most. George Lucas is known for subverting the main plot with underlying messages. Take the Duel of Fates, for example. That duel wasn't just about defeating Maul, it was about deciding Anakin's fate. So maybe George wasn't saying Anakin was truly the chosen one, but rather he left clues for us to ponder. Could it have been Padme all along? Maybe it's worth digging a little deeper. One last point worth mentioning is Padme's funeral. She's beautifully dressed with every detail carefully crafted. And I had the personal privilege of visiting a Star Wars costume exhibit in New York City, where this costume was on display, and it was even more impressive in person than in the film. But I noticed something in the exhibit, something that I later noticed in the film, that rings true in this theory or gives us a subtle hint, something we've all already seen. In that fateful scene, Padme is holding the trinket Anakin gave to her on Tatooine when they were just kids. And I think this is a subtle hint. It's not only recognizing the fact that Padme is with Anakin and that Anakin is with Padme, but now that she's passed, she's passing on the duty of the chosen one to Anakin Skywalker. She's signaling her love for him, even as Vader, but also more so signaling that the torch is being passed to him In some of her last words to Obi-Wan, she says, "There's still good in him." That scene is transformative, and so are all these other hints. And the imagery here suggests that Padme may have played a far greater role in Anakin's destiny than we realized. But what do you guys think? Could Padme have been the chosen one? All jokes aside, I think there's actual evidence here, something we should all consider going forward. And well, younglings, I hope you enjoyed this theory crafting lore with our little holocron. If you want to dissect more holocrons, lore, theories, and my thoughts on Star Wars at large, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And may the Force be with you always.